Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week in Lansing, Governor Rick Snyder unveiled his budget for the next fiscal year that will begin in October. And to no one's surprise, there was a heavy emphasis on getting money to the people of Flint, also Detroit Public Schools. After the governor laid out his budget, we sat down and talked with him. I asked him if he thought that there was enough money for Flint for the actual problems that need to be solved. And what about the other issue? He's got a bad public relations problem, too. Governor, with this budget, there's a significant amount of money, more money going to Flint. How far does that go in repairing the real problem, and how far does it go in repairing the public relations problem?
Well, the focus is the real problem, but again, we want to earn back trust from people in Flint, and that's one of the fundamental issues here. Hopefully it helps with both. What I would say is we've made some significant investments already. I'm making a request for multiple resources in a number of areas that deal with everything from water bills, which is on the top of mind of many Flint residents, to the water infrastructure, to the nutritional question for the kids, and then the health and follow-up with the children, and then saving a significant reserve. So if you look at what we tried to be was responsive to the areas we're hearing from Flint residents, concerns about the water, concerns about the kids, concerns about the long term of the community. What I didn't include in the budget presentation, but we are already working in a number of other areas, Rick, would be areas like economic development and some community development ideas.
Of course, these first expenditures for Flint are just that. It will be an ongoing process. And to talk more about that, we sat down with the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House, Pscholka. The representative from Stevensville says this is a start, and his committee will take a look at all of those appropriation requests. Mr. Chairman, let's talk about the budget. The governor unveiled it this week, and you and I were just talking. It's confusing for even observers who watch this because the budget is a very complex thing. And you did a really remarkable job last time we sat down of explaining kind of how all of that money goes. But let's start with, first of all, the money that the governor has requested for Flint. The Senate has already signed off on an additional $30 million that would be largely to pay water bills. If that's passed in the House, I believe that's in your committee right now, that's about $68 million that will be in emergency supplemental money. So as you explained it to me, as I understand it, that's the only supplemental money, and everything else that we're going to talk about today will be in the 16-17 budget. Is that right?
That's correct. And then that total is about 155 general fund and about $40 million or 155 general, $40 million of federal money that is part of that 195. And that 30 is included. I think the House will take action on that 30 next week. It'll be up in our committee. We're looking at it. We want to make sure there are a couple things, we won't make any monetary adjustments, but in terms of how we account for the money, where the money goes, there's some language changes that need to be cleaned up. There'll be some amendments on that money just to make sure we're being accountable for it and that it's going to the right places to pay the right bills.
One of the problems with circumstance, and this is certainly unique, but anytime you have these emergency situations, there is a need plus a desire to get money quickly into the pipeline, but the pipeline, and that's probably a bad analogy because of the circumstances of Flint, but to get the money out there quickly sometimes creates problems because distribution of that money isn't always smooth.
That's right, and what we've called for in all of these things, for the Auditor General to do an audit, that reports be made to both the Senate Appropriations Committee, led by my good friend Dave Hildebrand, who's in Grand Rapids area, and the House to us. So we see those at least twice a year just to make sure that that money's going to the right places. The nice part of this being a lot of it will be in the budget is my expectation for my subcommittee chairman is you bird dog this money. It is part of your budget. You've got oversight over that budget, and I expect you to know where it's at.
This is something that's impossible to know, but you understand, again, the budgeting process. You also have been well briefed on the problems in Flint. Will the next person that occupies this room, and by the way, thanks for letting us do this in the appropriations room. This is a great setting for this. But will the next appropriations chairman and the next still be dealing with this? Because this is a long-term fix.
Yeah, the nice part of what the governor proposed yesterday is this does get us over fiscal 17. So this takes us through the year of 16, through the year of 17, so that we have some idea. A lot of this was patchwork, it was emergency, it was, do this quickly, okay, but one of the things that myself and a lot of legislators started to ask of the administration is, give us the midterm, give us the longer term view of this so folks will have an idea. What the governor has said in kind of broad strokes is, yes, there is this initial investment that has to go in. You have to test all the children. You have to do those assessments. You have to do some of the early childhood education. And then that funnel begins to kind of go down a little bit in the out years. So there will be some, I expect, into 18 and 19, but that dollar amount should, the trend should start to go down.
One of the other things that the governor is looking at as he's putting money trying to fix this problem in Flint, and trying particularly to help children, as you just point out, that may have been affected, he's also looking at educational resources and some of the things that can help nutrition resources, which seems to be, as he described it when he was laying out the budget, pretty severe. If I heard him correctly, there wasn't even a traditional grocery store in part of this area. So are these the kind of things that through these agencies of the state you think you can effectively approach, because it's a really multi-pronged attack?
Yeah, and there's even talk of trying to get a grocery store built. Maybe there could be a Meijer in Flint someday. I hope so, and I hope it's a good Michigan-based company like that. But on the north end of Flint, there are no grocery stores. So you've literally got folks going to party stores and buying bags of Doritos. There is Doritos. There's the nutrition it's lacking. So to bring fresh fruits and vegetables in there, that is one of the things that will mitigate. That's what the scientists tell us, and the doctors, and our own chief medical officer testified in front of our committee a couple weeks ago. That is really critical, and that's something that has to happen now. That was part of that $28 million that first supplemental, or actually second supplemental, that went into Flint to start the nutrition, to start all of those types of activities. That mitigates and gives you a better chance. We got to get that help to the younger kids now.
I'm going to back up for just a minute because I want to move on to the rest of the budget. But before we do, I should point out that we talked about a emergency supplemental of $28 million. But before that, there was another $9 million or so that was used to reconnect the water system from Detroit back to Flint after this problem was discovered. So when we talk about $37 million or $37 million, those are the two supplementals, and then the other $30 million that you point out would be for paying for water bills, and that's something you may deal with next week. The reason I do that is I think it's easy to get confused. The numbers are big. Just recently I was talking with the lieutenant governor, and by putting a comma in my mind in a different place, we were talking about a totally different dollar figure. So just to try to keep it straight, that's kind of where we are now. The governor says there's about $5 million in federal money that was on an emergency allocation as well. So from your perspective, and I don't expect you to be an expert on all of the remediation that needs to be done, has this first shorter term attempt to get money to Flint, is it adequate?
My first complaint when I first heard about this at the end of September, when the governor was down there and said, here's some water and filters, was that is not sufficient. That we had to make that connection back to the lake water. And that is where that $9 million is actually, not only was it a reconnection back to Lake Huron water through Detroit, we're subsidizing the rate. So the taxpayers out there are subsidizing the rate difference between the Flint River and the Lake Huron water for a period of time. And in the upcoming budget, there's actually some dollars to take us out to as far as September. If it takes that long to recoat those pipes to make sure that water is safe. So that was that first $9 million. That was, let's get clean water back into Flint. Let's start coating the pipes. Let's get clean tap water to people as quickly as we can. The second supplemental was kind of more of an intermediate step that said, okay, we need to do the nutrition piece. We need to start doing the health and education and the social stuff. And we've started to do some of that. And now he's come back with the budget saying, okay, let's really dig in on all of those items and look at the infrastructure piece statewide as well. Because we know there's lead. The first house I bought in St. Joseph, Michigan, built in 1923, had lead water pipes, galvanized iron pipes. They're all over the place. They're probably in Grand Rapids. We know they're in Muskegon and Muskegon Heights. We know they're in Benton Harbor. There's all sorts of lead issues that are out there, even Ludington, place we wouldn't suspect, but Ludington has a lot of lead. So let's set aside some money in an infrastructure piece instead of making a deposit into the rainy day fund of $160 million that can be seed money. It's not going to solve the whole problem. There's no way. But it could act as seed money to try to draw down some additional funds as we look at infrastructure across the state. We just don't think about the stuff in the ground sometimes. And I was on a local water and sewer authority, so unfortunately I do know a lot about this stuff, that you've got to have reserves built up. You should be using part of your rates. These are issues that you should talk to your local city commissioners, county commissioners about, making sure that part of that money is set aside in your water and sewer rates in a reserve fund to take care of your infrastructure. That has to happen.
One of the interesting byproducts of this horrible event in Flint has been people are discussing just those things. And frankly, I've wandered around here for 20 years, and whenever we talk about infrastructure, people immediately think about roads, bridges. Sometimes they think about things like the grid. They think about electric
broadband.
Yep, some of those things.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about, you know, we ought to make sure we've got a good delivery system for our clean water to get there. So again, as tragic as this is, this at least has elevated this to a conversation that's being had not just at the local county water boards, but here in Lansing. There may be some positive out of that, right?
Not a real sexy issue to talk about,
Right.
Water and sewer pipes. I want to say it was probably 10 years ago. I was working in economic development in Benton Harbor, and we did a project. We tore up part of Main Street, and we found there were still wooden water pipes in use. So, and you go back some of our older cities, the problem that they're having in Flint right now, everything's on index cards. We don't even know which pipes are where. So part of that $28 million was to do some mapping to find out what pipes are where. So when people say, let's just rip up all the pipes, they did that in Washington, D.C. in 2010, and Dr. Edwards from Virginia Tech said that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. They actually made the situation worse. So let's actually find out, make the assessment, and be smart about it.
One final note about this, then we'll move on to the regular budget and the regular order. But you made the comment that the governor decided, instead of putting money in the rainy day fund, that he would spend this money, put it as a strategic reserve for this infrastructure. What does that say to you when this governor has been the guy who came in from day one and said, wait a minute, we got to have some money in the bank, we got to pay off some long-term loans? There have been some people who have been unhappy about that because they think that money should have gone into other operational expenses for particular groups. But this has been a priority for him, and he says that now the priority for infrastructure is greater than savings. What does that tell?
That's a pretty seismic shift when you think about the governor who's a CPA, who did come in talking about long-term liabilities and debt, putting the state in a better financial position. We've improved our credit rating, done a lot of things. We had $2 million in the bank, and we're going to have $611 million in the bank end of fiscal 16. So we are in a much better financial position. So instead of taking another $150 million, and the governor would like to build that up to $1.2 billion. That's what the auditors tell you that you should have in reserves. But instead of making that additional $160 or $170 million in a rainy day, he's saying, look, let's set it aside for a state infrastructure fund. You're right, that is a major shift in priority for this governor.
In all, it's almost $55 billion of spending this new budget the governor has laid out, and the part that we talked about is only a few hundred million. So what about all of the rest? That's what we'll talk about when we come back to the point. Welcome back to the point. Ultimately, everybody in the House and the Senate will have to sign off on Governor Snyder's budget that was introduced this past week. But initially, it will be the Appropriations Committees and the subcommittees in both the House and the Senate. We sat down with the chairman of the Appropriations Committee from the House, Representative Pscholka, to talk about how that process works. Let's talk about that budget in total.
54.8.
54.8.
It's only now. So for my Grand Rapids taxpayers out there that are looking at big numbers, look, this is 0.8% larger than last year. So we are controlling the growth and rate of government, right, overall. But we have shifted our priorities inside that pie of where we're spending that money. And really, there's four big items that are going to take up most of the conversation. One is Flint that we've discussed. The other is the Detroit Public Schools, which is a $72 million a year tab going out for the next 2 years. We've got these specialty drugs that are coming online. That's going to hit the state to the tune of about $130 million a year. We did a transfer a little while ago to take care of this year, but that's cystic fibrosis and hepatitis C that we have to cover as a state. Federal government mandates that. So there's some big issues, and the infrastructure piece. So there's those 4 big issues. The good news, Michigan's economy continues to grow. So because of that, our payments for welfare and Medicaid are going down to the tune in this budget of about $500 million. That's a major shift. So there's $500 million out of Health and Human Services that allows the governor to kind of change the priorities and use some of those dollars in some of those other places. So folks who say, oh my gosh, look at the big issues that are out there. There's no way these guys can do, you can only do one. I've had members, Republicans and Democrats, tell me, look, Al, there's no way, we could do one of these. We can't do them both. I'm saying we can do them both. We are in a good enough financial position. The economy is in good enough shape. The general fund is in very good shape that we can make these investments and keep the growth of government at less than 1%.
That's a remarkable statement if you consider if we had been sitting here 10 years ago today, nobody would have had that kind of estimation because you couldn't even get budgets agreed to on time. So there is an upside, at least from an economic standpoint. But let's talk a little bit about that Detroit Public Schools, because lost in the conversation to some degree was the thing that might have been the biggest, most urgent need, and that is the school district in the state's largest city that can run out of money sometime in the next 45 or 60 days, but for the appropriation that I assume you guys will make, that will get a cash infusion in there. But it's not a done deal from the standpoint that the conversation has been continued. Senator Hansen has introduced bills. He's become a resident of Detroit, practically traveling back and forth. He did a show with us a few weeks ago, and I was amazed at the amount of time that he's trying to spend with all of the stakeholders to try to come up with a solution. But there doesn't seem to be any unanimity when it comes to that decision. So how tough is that part of the budget going to be?
Well, I'm going to give Jeff a little shout out here. I think Senator Hansen's done a great job communicating the financial side and what the ins and outs really are. I mean, if we don't handle this soon, you're looking at a liability that could be $3.5 billion if you allow them to just go into bankruptcy. And a judge then decides tells the state, here's when you got to pay, what you got to pay, and it's a big number. We know it's going to be a lot more than $700 million. The bankruptcy judge that I've talked to said it could be as high as $3.5 billion. I believe today, as you and I sit here, we have agreement, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, that we got to fix the financial piece. I don't think there's any question about that. Where the rub comes, where there's still folks at loggerheads, is what does the Detroit Public Schools look like going forward? What is the policy stuff that we're going to get done? What's the governance? What's the structure? What's it going to look like? Who's going to run these schools? That's the piece that we still haven't decided on, and that's what's, I think, holding up the Detroit Public Schools debate. I think Jeff's done a great job laying out the financial piece of it, and I think you've got agreement that we've got to do the financials. It's just what's it going to look like after that?
There is more money, according to the governor, in the way he delivered this budget, that could be between $60 and $120 equivalency for per pupil increases in K through 12, and more money for higher ed, bringing it back to the point to some of the money that was cut 5 years ago. So that won't be enough because education needs, and education obviously is a very high priority. Step in the right direction?
Absolutely. $150 million K-12. That averages $100 a student, but it'll be 60 to 20 because we'll do that 2X funding again. So if you're at the bottom, you get a little bit more. You'll get $120 per student. Higher ed is really good news. And I was chair of higher ed a couple years ago when we got $80 million into higher ed. This is probably the second largest increase we've had over the last 5 years. It does help. I told the governor I thought he was a little heavy on his tuition number, which was 4.8. I think the legislature will look at reducing that. We've really got to look at the cost of tuition because we're just pricing families out of higher ed. So I think we're willing to make more of an investment, increase it by $61 million, but we've got to get a little bit better on the tuition restraint number.
Let me talk about that. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, and I also don't want to hold you too much longer because I know you've got a busy schedule here today. But when you just said that, you're pricing families out of a college education. I've got two young boys. We start with that rudimentary putting some money away and putting
That
some money
529 count,
That-
Rick.
that-
Get that 529
That's
going,
right.
Rick. Come on.
That's right. It's there.
Right.
But the reality is, if I put everything away, it would be difficult. If tuitions continue to escalate the way they have over the past 10 years for the next 10 years.
Right.
Is there anything that you as a legislative body can do to reverse the paradigm? Used to be when, and I think we talked about this before, when we were going to college, we paid about 25% of the load and the states picked
Paid
up about
75.
75%.
That's right.
That's
Right.
been inverted, and actually the state doesn't even pay 25% for
Probably
some.
closer to 20.
Right. Is there anything that changes that, or is this just the new reality and that people who want to go to college are going to have to make some real serious financial decisions?
Well, I think we are going to have to make more of an investment as a state, but at the same time, as we do that, I really do think we have to do more performance funding, holding the universities and colleges that expect certain things to happen. Graduation rate, I mean, the more, if you go 5 or 6 years, the costs go up considerably, as both of us know, I paid a little tuition at a little college called Hope College. She had a great experience there. I'm not complaining about anything, but it is expensive. But as we make more of an investment, I really do think we need some tuition restraint. And that needs to be held to the rate of inflation or lower as we try to turn that around. So I like the tuition restraint language that we've got. I think we need to hold folks' feet to the fire so we can start to make some progress there.
We could do this show almost every week. We could go through every line item and talk about things, and I greatly appreciate your time. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about this. In this room, this past week, the governor sat right there and he laid this out, and he thanked you all for listening and looked forward to you making improvements on his plan, which got a good chuckle from everybody in here because it's about.
We always do. That's right. My response was we always do.
Make it
Don't worry, Governor. We'll help you out here.
So the process now, and the process certainly has been streamlined over the past 5 years, partially because of a new administration, partially because the economy has started to get better, and that makes it a little easier to budget when you have money to budget with. But what will the process be? What starts now? What is your role as the Appropriations Chair? And do you see any of these individual ideas that are going to be particularly troublesome going forward?
I don't, because we've got some big issues inside this budget that once they get settled, the rest of it kind of falls into place. And we've done some pretty good work here. The Healthy Kids Dental Program, which it'll just expanded to Kent County, that'll be fully funded in this budget. You know, that'll be 800,000 kids now covered with dental care, which is a good thing. That impacts health care down the road. So there's a lot of things in there. What happens now is the subcommittees get to work, and we've already started to get to work. We'll be having lots of bills that'll still be running through appropriations, but the subcommittees will start digging down into individual line items, having hearings, coming up with budgets. I'll be looking at targets that we can meet. I'll be spending a lot of time with my friend Dave Hildebrand, working with the Senate to try to come up with a final product that protects people's lives and protects people's treasure.
So the budget process has started, and as you heard the chairman say, they expect it to be done by sometime in early June. We're back with more To the Point in just a moment. So now, Governor Rick Snyder has introduced a budget, and the legislature will start working on it. Of course, they could make some changes, but ultimately we expect much of the money that he requested for Flint and for Detroit Public Schools could be on the way sooner rather than later, and it's something we will follow over the next several weeks and months. Also, next week, our guest on this program will be Congressman Dan Kildee from Flint. We'll talk to him about his hometown and how recovery efforts are going there, what else he believes needs to be done. And of course, while all of this is going on, we're keeping an eye on Super Tuesday, which is not so far away. That will be the next big primary season for all of those presidential candidates, and it happens just 1 week before they come here to Michigan. All that and more every Sunday morning when you join us at 10 o'clock right here on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.